Good morning. It is still morning on Wednesday, November the 9th, 2022. I want to thank you all for attending this UNT Dallas Topical Issue Series. My name is Professor Matt Houston. I am lecturer in the School of Business, teaching entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and leadership at the University of North Texas at Dallas. And I am honored to serve on the Urban Search Institute Board of Advisors. This Urban Search Institute that is spearheaded by Dr. James Agbazaki is an organization that combines not only data and research, but also programming opportunities to bridge and to educate the community, not only at UNT Dallas, but in the city of Dallas, in the North Texas region in general. And so I want to thank Dr. Agbazaki for the last several years for providing programs during the pandemic, where we were educating our school and the community on protocols and updates for the pandemic, but also during economic development activities, healthcare activities. The Urban Search Institute has been the voice for the university and the community in providing education. This is another one of those programs. Today, our topic is going to be on big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics, the challenges and opportunities. We all know that we live in a technological world. There's a metaverse out there. There's data that's been extrapolated for the last couple of decades so that we could create ease of life for us as we evolve as human beings. And so today we have two subject matter experts that will provide the case for AI and robotics, and we're very excited to have them. But first, I would like to bring one of our supporters of not only the Urban Search Institute, but one of our sponsors, which is the Greater Dallas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, in which we have Mr. Rick Ortiz as president. The organization, along with several other community organizations, have been supporting UNT Dallas for the last several years. And Rick, please provide us some remarks as we thank you for your continued service.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure. Once again, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. I want to start off by thanking the UNT Dallas Urban Search Institute. I'd like to also thank the Dallas Black Chamber, UNT Dallas Career Services, or UNT Dallas Career Services, UNT Dallas School of Business, and all of you for making this possible once again. And you're right, Matt, it's been a great partnership that's brought a lot of great information to a lot of people in our communities that really need it and have benefited from it. And really, that's what we're in the business of doing, is helping to facilitate and provide access to and inform, and it aligns exactly with what the Greater Dallas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce stands for, what it's been doing for 80 plus years in this community, and in serving and growing and supporting the Hispanic business community, as well as aligning and partnering with all communities here in the region to make it an even stronger community as a whole. So thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you for bringing us on, and I look forward to today's topic, which is truly one that is the present and the future for what we do as in the business world and in just everyday world. So I look forward to a great event today, great presenters, and a fantastic moderator. So I'm looking forward to it. So once again, thank you again.
Thank you, Rick, and it's a pleasure working with you in the community as we advocate for our community businesses. I will speak briefly on behalf of the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce, in which I serve on the board of directors, and we are a continued supporter of UNT Dallas and the Urban Search Institute. On behalf of our president, Harrison L. Blair, and our chairman of the board, Mr. Jimmy Gaston, we are honored to serve as sponsors and partners, discussing things such as technology that's going to not only impact our individual lives, but also how our families and our communities can build in the current marketplace. Knowing data, knowing the importance of using artificial intelligence to help be a resource for historically underutilized businesses, which are either understaffed, under-resourced. Knowing tools like this is something that the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce for the last 3 years have put an emphasis on, as we are focusing on data so we can have business advocacy to build better our community. So we are excited to hear this program. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to the woman, the person who is going to spearhead this discussion. She is a rock star in her own right. I am not going to give you her entire bio. I am also not going to give you the lengthy experiences I have with her in the leadership role, not only in Dallas, but in the state of Texas. I want to introduce you all to Ms. Veronica Torres-Hazley. Veronica Torres-Hazley is the CEO of Torres-Hazley Enterprise, and her portfolio includes a V12 yoga studio, workplace fit company, and self-care brand, and healthy Latina lifestyle. So she has an organization that is focused on building the holistic person and holistic communities. She has, outside of her entrepreneurial ventures, she creates just entities and organizations to build the Latinx population and to also build Dallas as a whole and Texas as a whole, building racial relations across cultural borders. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to my friend, community advocate, rock star, Ms. Veronica Torres-Hazley.
Wow, Matt, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I think about all of the experiences that we have together and making our community great, and this is just another one to add. So thank you guys for having me. I am so delighted to be here today and to introduce our presenters today, who are also our rock stars. I'll use the same reference, who are doing amazing work in their individual industries and in their communities as well. And I'll start with our ladies first. I have here Dr. Somba Musara, who is Assistant Professor of Political Science at James Madison University. Dr. Musara received her PhD in Public Policy and Administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. Her research is focused on public financial management and economic development. Dr. Musara is a multidisciplinary expert. She is trained accountant, fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, and also holds a Master's of Business Administration with specialization in strategy. There's also many other, responsibilities that Dr. Musara has, and she'll go into with her research and teaching that informs perspectives and gained from living and working and traveling across more than 25 countries and 5 continents. Thank you, Dr. Musara, for joining us today. And with us, I also have Dr. Harvey White, who is the affiliate professor of the Biden School of University of Delaware and a professor emeritus at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. White is an affiliated professor at the Biden School of the University of Delaware. His research focuses on talent management, including nonprofit and community leadership, as well as organizational management and performance evaluation. He was the founder of the Gulf Coast Center for Healthy Communities and an outstanding professor and a thought leader on health policy, health inequities, healthy and active communities, and public health. Thank you both for joining us. We're super excited about what you're going to be presenting today, and I'm going to pass this over to get our presentation started with Dr. White.
Good morning. Thank you, Veronica. We're delighted to be here today. Dr. Musara and I are excited about this topic and looking forward to having some very vibrant discussions with you. Let me share, I do a lot of international work, and I'm always keen to say I learn as much as I share, so I look forward to learning as well as presenting today and sharing our background in terms of this topic. I wanted to start, though, with the notion that we're not just talking about data and machines, we're talking about people as well. And so my first slide there has labor, talent, and intelligence, because we are talking about people. And the second slide actually is about the chronology of how we've, through the years, depended on people to produce a surplus so some people could do art and work in laboratories. And then the last slide at the very bottom of that third slide, I say we're experiencing an era in which we may not need as much human labor as in the past. And that's because artificial intelligence is going to liberate us to a large extent from many of the manual things we're doing right now. And then the fourth slide or fifth slide, actually, and it's important for us to share this, is that while in this discussion this week and next week, we're going to be talking about some of the things that we should be concerned about, we also want to make sure that you're aware that we're extremely excited about the contributions that artificial intelligence is going to make to our life in terms of our work, our play, and how we interact with each other. So I wanted just to share this up front because we do support artificial intelligence, but like everything else, we have to make sure that we manage it and that it in fact is addressing the needs of human beings, and that it doesn't impact any one particular community more significantly than the others. That being said, Dr. Mazzara is going to lead us off today. She's going to give us an overview and introduction. And when she has finished, I'll come back and talk about some crucial portions in terms of big data and AI. And also, if time permits today, if not, I'll do it next week, go through some of the major applications that we use IA and particularly big data and robotics today, and just show some examples. So again, I would like to yield and let Dr. Mazzara actually give us that introduction and overview, and then I'll follow her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for starting us on this conversation today. So I'm going to give an overview, like Dr. White said, of what big data, AI, and robotics are. So in our daily lives now, we often use language that, clearly shows that we're using and we are working alongside either AI, big data, or robotics. So we often reference big data in our daily conversations. And sometimes we think about that and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're fully aware and sometimes we aren't. Depending on where you live in the world, you will wake up in the morning and ask Siri what the weather is like for that day. Or you're going to ask Alexa to play for you your favorite songs, So clearly what we are seeing is that from our bedrooms when we're in our natural states through to the boardrooms where decisions are made, very important decisions are made, artificial intelligence, big data, and robotics are being used. So there are many other terms that are used when we think about, these developments in technology, RPA, robotics process automation, software management, a number of mobile apps that we have around, and autonomous vehicles. And there's a lot more words that will keep getting discovered because all these new developments, technological developments, are all emanating from what we are going through right now, but then also they're a large and major component of the fourth industrial revolution. So we know we had the first, second, and third, and now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. So I have on my slides here, you can see the big terms that I reference to, and that's what we talk about all the time. So when we talk about big data, what do we really mean? So big data are massive volumes of data. These are data sets that are so large and you cannot just process them by looking at them. When we were kids and we were learning math, 1 + 1, it's very easy, and some were pretty smart, could multiply up to a certain number of numbers. And that human capacity that we have nowadays, we cannot use it fully. So we have to rely on automation to enable us to process large volumes of data. So the volumes of data are complex. It's very, very hard to analyze. And we cannot, with certainty and efficiency, be able to process the various types of data further using our own human brains. So when we talk about big data, we're basically talking about the 3 V's. It's large volumes of data, high velocity, and lots of variety of data. And then moving on from big data, we have to understand what AI is. So artificial intelligence has a number of terminologies that I use to describe that. And the reason why the descriptions keep changing of AI, it's because the technology keeps changing. So when we think about artificial intelligence, or AI as we call it mostly, we need to think about 3 types of systems. And those types of systems of AI are analytical, human-inspired, and humanized. So what does this mean? Analytical AI has characteristics consistent with cognitive intelligence. And basically this mimics human sort of representation. It's a very good example that I can give when I think about AI that is analytical in nature. It's machine learning, where we are trying to use applications to assist with assessing interview candidates, for example. So that's analytical AI. And then we also think about human-inspired AI. Human-inspired AI also combines the different kinds of elements that we have. So it includes those for recruitment of individuals. And then there is humanized AI, which has a number of characteristics. It has the previous characteristic of analytical. It can analyze large volumes of data, like those that are used in machine learning. And then it also has aspects of human inspired, where it can do certain kinds of assessments. And so basically humanized AI, its applications like Siri, what's the weather like today? Alexa, can you play this song for me? So the primary purpose of these software systems is basically to enable self-conscious and self-aware machine to human and machine to machine interactions. And autonomous vehicles, all those are examples that we can use when we think about these higher level representations of human activity, but in human form. And then we have to think about robotics. So robotics is basically used and involves the design, construction, operation, and use of robots. So robots are basically there to substitute humans and to replicate human actions. So there are multiple uses of robots. And we have on that picture there, the Deputy Secretary General, Madam Amina, with Sophia. So Sophia is a human robot, and she was granted citizenship by Saudi Arabia in 2017. So she's able to attend meetings and she can have conversations. And yeah, so when we think about robotics and we think about robots ideally need to obey 3 basic rules. They're called Asimov's laws. And this is written by in fiction terms. But ideally, robots need to ensure that they do not injure a human being. That's in an ideal world. And either through inaction or willingly harming a human being. Then the second rule of a robot is that it must obey orders that are given to it by humans, except when those orders are in conflict with the first law of harming a human being. And then the third law that a robot has to follow in an ideal world is that it must protect its own existence, as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and the second. So how does it protect its own existence? What if something seriously goes wrong? I think those are some of the conversations that we'll have later on as we go on in this program. So we have defined these terms in a very basic way. The next thing that we need to look at is why. Why should we take care? Why should we even be concerned? And I have a number of reasons that I'm advancing here. The list can be long of why we should be concerned, why we should take interest in big data, AI, and robotics. First, this technology is here to stay. It is not going anywhere. We did see through the pandemic that some countries were actually using robots to enforce social distancing. And we know that in a number of institutions, productive capacity and production lines utilize robots to get things done and moved around. But then the second reason why we need to be concerned is because these technological advancements that we're making have the capacity to help us with our own rationality and processing capacity. From the work of Herbert Simon, we know that we have bounded rationality as human beings. We can only make decisions based off the information that we have, and we can only process so much. So when we have big data, AI, and robotics in place, it helps us to limit the limitation that we have in terms of our processing capacity. So in many ways, it helps to avert the challenges that we would have as a result of having bounded rationality. And then the third reason why we need to be concerned is basically impact creation. So the utilization of artificial intelligence and big data and robotics has the potential and ability to create lots of economic value. A 2018 study that was done by the McKinsey Institute found that the utilization of these technological advancements would be able to bring about value and impact in terms of economic wealth between $3.5 to $5.8 trillion. That's a lot of money, and that's used across different sectors of the economy. And then the fourth reason is that it grants competitive advantage. Whoever wins this battle or this fight, or whoever gets to the top of utilizing AI gets to rule the world, you know. Those are the exact words that were put forth by Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2017 when he addressed kids in Russian schools. So other than competitive advantage, the other reason why we need to be concerned is that the future of research and most work is actually so intertwined with artificial intelligence. We'll keep seeing job advertisements like the one that I put on here that are specifically requiring individuals to have the ability to be able to use AI to measure poverty or to just help us to understand the world and how things are functioning. So the other reason why we need to be concerned is because it is the inescapable future. Nobody's going to escape this, you know, at least if you're within the circumference of the sphere that we are in, you have to be very knowledgeable and you have to know that this is not going anywhere. So what we see in this picture here is IDA, and IDA is the first ultra realistic artist robot. So she was invited at the House of Lords in the United Kingdom in London, and she was speaking to members of parliament there. So, and of course, there was a technological hitch, and she had to break down, and the owner had to put her up together. But we see that that is going to be the future. It is the present right now. We see more applications in courts of law, and we see that robots are going to be used in many, many other different settings. So I thought that I, needed to just give this overview of what these terms are and what they mean. And in terms of the applications and implications and new developments that are on there, we're going to segue into the conversation with Dr. White. So I'll hand over to Dr. White now.
Thank you. Dr. Magada. If I could have slide 7. And I want to put this slide here simply because well, that's fine, either 7 or 8. You've seen them both. And please advance them as I talk. I'll simply say next slide. So we can understand just the magnitude of big data. Even in public administration programs now, almost every program wants a data scientist. Next slide. Slide 8, please. What this slide shows is that if you were to talk about population of nations, that Facebook would be the largest nation in the world. And Facebook probably has the largest connection of data in the world. Facebook also probably knows more about me and you than we know it sometimes. Surprisingly, every once in a while, Facebook would tell me that 5 years ago, I was doing so and so and so in a certain place that I have no recollection of. And so big data out there is keeping track of many of the things we're doing. The other thing that happens, and I think Dr. Mazada mentioned this, sometimes I will simply look at an item on my computer. The next thing I know is that I'm getting something flashing up on the screen asking me to look at this item. And it comes over and over again. So artificial intelligence is actually being used right now for marketing, tracking our behavior, and actually keeping track of what we're doing over the period of time. Next slide, please. So the crucial questions, and I'm not sure we should answer these today, but I simply want us to be aware. When we talk about big data, we need to ask the question of whose data. We need to ask the question whose values are in that data, whose vision, who will get the new jobs created by IA, whose jobs will be eliminated, when will, how will all the wealth be distributed? Let me share with you, I was in South Africa at a conference, and one of my colleagues there was talking about artificial intelligence. And he said to us, if I were in New York, and based on the data that's in most autonomously driven vehicles, my ethnic group would probably be run over if I were in New York. And they got me to thinking about the values that are put into artificial intelligence. Certainly those vehicles are made or designed to make intelligent decisions. Does it run over a child or senior citizens like myself? It will be making those kinds of decisions. Would it hit a school bus or will it run and hit a car? Those are the kinds of decisions that will have to be made. Another thing that's happening right now in terms of the big data and artificial intelligence is used in almost every industry. Next slide, please. So one of the things we can, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, we'll come back to it next week, is that the biases that go into artificial intelligence. I wanted just to give you an example. What was thought to be the most intelligent machine ever built was called Tide. That machine was allowed to interact with people and learn from people, pick up new technology and new words and new speech patterns. In a period of a few hours, in interacting with people who were spewing out hate and racist literature, that machine learned to be racist and homophobic and started spewing out offensive words, and even to the point that it called, at that point, President Obama a monkey, and even denied that the Holocaust existed. And why did we raise that? Because that machine was designed to pick up data in a conversation, and it picked up the data that was in society. So we have to ask ourselves, whose data, whose values are being put into artificial intelligence? Next slide, please. So we conclude then that we have to make sure that we address the biases that is in or can be in robotics and big data. Next slide. We'll go through these very quickly. This is simply to note that there's a political economy and there's going to be a lot of money made. There are going to be jobs lost. And one of the things that we need to be aware of then is who's going to be affected, and we'll address this in our next section. Next slide. So here's the piece that we'll get into in our next session, but we want to introduce it today. People of color are underrepresented in the data. People of color are misrepresented in the data. People of color are not generating their own data. People of color are underrepresented in the artificial intelligence workplace. They're not creating artificial intelligence. They're not building the products. They're not programming the machines, they're not operating the products, they're not servicing the products. People of color here are referred to as African Americans and Hispanics. So it's important then for us to get into that community, one, in terms of understanding that this is going to affect our lives, it's going to create jobs, it's going to eliminate jobs, and we need to be involved in the process. Next slide, please. Again, very simply, because we're not involved in the creation of the data can be, and it often is, very incomplete. And we need to make sure that if the data is going to impact us, the data needs to represent us and our values, and we need to be involved in creating the big data. Next slide, please. There are implications here for social equity, and we will talk about that. Certain jobs are going to be eliminated. New jobs are going to be eliminated. And the question is, and the data next week will show this in the presentation, Hispanics and African Americans are going to lose their jobs more often than other segments of society as we use artificial intelligence to do the work right now that human beings are using. Next slide, please. This is just some ways in which, or some industries where we're using big data right now. Next slide, and we'll come back to that. So what is the problem? IA with problem solving. One, why do we use it? Because with artificial intelligence, there's less chance of error. It can be used to explore the depths of the ocean, the depth of the space. It can be used in repetitive, time-consuming tasks more efficiently than human beings, and it can create algorithms where doctors and patients are exposed to less risk. The point here is, when we're talking about artificial intelligence and machines, robots, machines do not require sleep, breaks, insurance, pensions, and are able to function without stopping. They can be more cost effective than human beings. Next slide, please. This is just a view of the many ways artificial intelligence is used: face recognition, manufacturing, security systems. Next slide, please. Again, this is just some of the achievements that we've seen in artificial intelligence. And we'll come back to this one just a bit. Next slide. Next slide. Again, this is simply showing the many uses of artificial intelligence in terms of equipment, robots, and system. Next slide. This artificial arm can feel and sense your pulse and then transmit that back to the person who's attached to the artificial arm. Next slide. This is Watson, IBM, intelligent computer. Next slide. It has defeated human beings on a game show. So one of the things that artificial intelligence has done is, in fact, allow machines to be social creatures in a sense that they can interact with human beings. Next slide. They can solve mathematical problems much faster than we can. Next slide. They're used in medicine, robotics. You can operate more efficiently using robotics than you can the human hand. Next slide. Again, this is just an explanation. There are less complications when you use robotics. Kidneys are taken out. Major surgeries are done robotically these days. Next slide. And I won't go through these in detail. I want to get to some of the examples, but one of the things right now that's happening in kidney transplant, we're using artificial intelligence to decide who should get the kidney based on a criteria that's put in there. In employment and human resources, the first round of eliminations for job applicants is done by machine these days. Next slide, please. This is an example that caught our eye when we were at the beginning of the pandemic, COVID-19. Rwanda didn't have enough nurses. They purchased these robots that in fact can replace up to 30 nurses and do the job. And the question is, once you've used robots, would you go back to human beings? That question is still out. Next slide, please. I found this just recently. Mexico is using robotics to do blood pressure, look at the patient's history. Again, a human being does not have to come into a patient coming into this particular hospital until certain types of tests have been done. That's for the protection of the staff. And also it gives immediate attention to patients who are in the waiting room. Next slide, please. Social robots. Social robots are being used in cases where you have children that need attention, elderly patients who just need someone to talk to. These patients, these robots can interact with them in a conversational manner. Next slide, please. This shows the array of use of robots in manufacturing automobiles. Cars in some factories are produced almost completely by robots with very little human touching of the vehicle before it's a completed vehicle. Next slide, please. As Dr. Mazzata mentioned, self-driving automobiles. Go through the next slides, just showing the point that she's made. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is mining. Back one, please. In mining, and this is crucial in developing countries, but it's actually becoming very crucial here. I was in South Africa, and I went down 3 miles under the ground in a gold mine. It was a shocking experience. We now have robotics in mining in this country and around the world, where human beings no longer have to go down to the depths. Even robots are used to do the blasting that's taking place. They can be remotely designed to bring up the ore and bring it up to the top with very little human intervention, except observing what the robots are doing. Next slide, please. This is in the food service. We have a restaurant here in Delaware, I am, where the waiter comes in as a robot, takes your order, goes back and brings the food back to you. The left one is not very clear. This is a drink making machine. These 2 robotic arms can replace 20 bartenders. So again, used in the food service industry. The next slide, please. I put this one in just last week. I was looking through CNN, and there was a headline, and I always mispronounce this, Chipotle, I think it is, Chapeles, is testing the use of robots to make tortilla chips. And so I was shocked to see that. And again, I put the citation there. Next slide, please. In farming, almost on some farms, farming is becoming completely automated. The watering, fertilizing, and the harvesting. Next slide, and again, this is spelled out in this slide. I won't go through all the details, but it goes to what is done on the farm to eliminate human labor. Next slide, please. In the military, here we have on the left a robotic soldier along the Pakistani-Chinese border. On the right, we have what we used to call pack mules way back, where you use robots to carry munitions to the front line. Human beings don't have to be involved in that. Next slide, please. I mentioned the social component of interaction with human beings. They actually have in Europe sex shops where one can have a physical relationship with a robot who has all of the physical features of a human being. They have them for men and women, and you pay to have an intercourse with a sex doll. So I only show this to show just how detailed and how human-like robots can be. They can even respond to the touch, and actually you can program to say certain things during the act of intimacy. Next one, please. This shows where the explosion is taking place in terms of robots around the world. You can see that going over a 10-year period, we've doubled the number of robots around the world. Next slide, please. This is a continuation. This shows where the countries involved in this. Singapore per capita has the largest percentage. Next slide. Here we're looking at, on an annual basis, who's installing the most robots? China, Japan, the United States. Keep going. Same here. By continent and not by nation necessarily, we look at where robots are being installed around the world. Next slide. This is the end of the session, and I believe we're pretty much on time. But what I want to do is to talk about why we went through this data with you today. We went through this data because it's not just that we're talking about artificial intelligence in the abstract. We're talking about artificial intelligence and its impact that it's going to have on human beings. It's going to create jobs, it's going to create opportunity, but it's also going to eliminate jobs. It's going to make the workplace safer, but it's going to eliminate the opportunity for some people to work. What we have found in our research is that there's reason to be concerned. In the next 15 to 20 years, there's going to be a major reduction in jobs in certain areas for human beings. And our conclusion is that we cannot wait 15 years to start planning to prepare people for those jobs, particularly in communities of color, particularly in the African-American community and Hispanic community. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, we're ready to entertain some questions, and I will leave that to you as to how you want to proceed and do that.
Thank you for that amazing presentation. I'm writing notes to myself, like I need to go back to those slides and reference. It is scary and exciting, I'm sure. And I definitely have a lot of questions that I'm sure some of our participants that are listening in may have as well. One for say, are there things that should not be outsourced to the AI machines?
It's, and I'll let Dr. Mazzotta answer this as well. My position is yes, there are some things. And I believe those are things that particularly relate to life and death. I don't think a machine should have that. I think when it comes to reproductive rights, when it comes to health care, I don't think the machine should be the last. Because if I'm correct, and I went through this very quickly, and I hope we can have more discussion next week, if in fact the values we put into the artificial intelligence, the big data, if that data does not reflect the values of all people, then it's going to be biased. And then when you start making decisions about who gets healthcare, and data already show that people of color, when they walk into a physician's office, that person has to wait longer. That person doesn't get the same kind of tests assigned. Those same kind of biases then will go into artificial intelligence. And so we need to be very, very prudent in terms of our observation and participation to make sure that we don't institutionalize in artificial intelligence the biases that are already in society. And that's the danger that we're concerned about. Dr. Mazzotta, I don't want to take up all the time, so please jump in here anytime.
I think you've ably answered that one. I think it really borders on issues around ethics and morality, and issues of equity that you've talked about. So should we give everything up to machines to do for us? I also accept that we shouldn't. There have to be some things that we let human beings be able to take care of, so that we don't go on with the inequalities or continue with the biases, because in the end, if we let robots and machines to work on certain sensitive issues, we're going to lose things, I think, in the end. So we need to think in terms of ethics. We need to think about, what's the moral imperative of, letting machines do certain kind of operations that ideally human beings are supposed to be working on. So I'll leave it there.
And if I might add, machines can be more efficient than human beings. They can also be more efficient in being racist and discriminatory. And we have to remember that, because if you're talking with a human being and that person has been socialized to be biased, you can have a conversation with that person and make that person at least reflect on what he or she's saying, and perhaps reconsider that maybe I'm a little biased because of my background. If you program that into a machine, the machine won't be able to do that. It will simply do what it's programmed to do, which is be effective in doing what you're supposed to do, and that can be practicing racist behavioral practices.
So I know that another question we kind of talked about, you kind of mentioned values, what values and whose values, but who is the decision maker, or how is that, in your opinion, what regulation, like at what level of government does that sort of come into play when these decisions are being made on what values and whose values are going to be considered when these technology decisions are being made?
One of the reasons Dr. Mazzotta and I are in this business is because at this point it's not regulated. And we believe that perhaps there needs to be more discussion about or at least some thought towards regulating that. Right now, if I'm producing a robot, there are no regulations what I cannot put in. The other piece is that relates to the question is that we have to be more assertive and participatory in generating the data. Right now, you have large entities that are generating the data that goes into artificial intelligence. We have to address that. Like the center itself that's hosting this event today may want to look at, hey, should we become an entity for generating data that reflects the values of underserved communities? Because right now, there's no entity out there that's specifically focused on making sure that underserved communities are represented in the big data out there. Did I lose you? Sorry.
Yeah, okay, she's coming back on. Okay. Mhm.
I'm so sorry. I kind of lost you for a second. So I'm hoping that you answered the question in that regard.
You're talking to a professor. It's dangerous to ask us a question because we tend to talk a lot, so forgive us. But I think I said we ourselves have to be involved in generating the data. And that's one of the concerns that I actually put a plug in for the center that we're in today, that maybe the center should consider that one of the areas that it wants to explore getting into. Because we don't have any entity right now that's specifically looking at the inclusion of underserved communities in the big data out there, specifically.
Absolutely.
Or looking at whether it's some evaluative tool.
I know because, I mean, there's still regulation on the internet right now, right? As we look at social media, as you mentioned, so appropriately with some of the slides that you were presenting on, they're still not regulating that. And I don't know, I guess social media has been around for 10 years or so. I'm not sure, more or less. So do you feel like that's going to have, I mean, for us to get regulation for the future of this, we've got to start on now appropriately spoken in your presentation, which is pretty intense and almost worrisome if you think about it now. We're kind of behind the curve with that. Will or how will AI reduce human involvement? I know you tapped in a little bit about socio and organization decision-making. And how is that going to come into play, or how is that going to reduce the involvement? Can you elaborate a little more?
Dr. Mazzotta, I don't want to take up all the time. I'll be happy to say a few words and then you can come in. We're going to talk some about this next week, but let me just, as a caveat, when you look at almost every profession that has a repetitive aspect to it, those jobs are going to be taken over by artificial intelligence. Whether we're talking about answering the telephone, accounting is one of those professions, even the legal profession is starting to be one of those professions that a machine can look up case law a lot quicker than human beings can. And so you're looking at a variety of jobs being eliminated. Now, should that bother us? Not necessarily. If we can have it done more effectively and more efficiently, that's okay. But it's also going to eliminate some jobs. So what happens to people who used to work in those positions, those clerical positions, those secretary positions, those accounting positions, those clerk positions? I think that becomes the question that we, I think, have to address. And there will be new jobs created. How do we now train people for those new jobs that are being created? I'm sorry, Dr. Mazzotta, I tend to be over aggressive in this. Please jump in.
Yeah, could you say the question again? Because I sort of got carried away listening in. What's the question again, Veronica?
Well, no, it was mentioned on the reduction of human involvement, right, in organization decision-making, in societal and organization decision-making. Because when you think about it, it's so intimidating to think about, because you're like, it's just so vast in that sense. And Dr. White did mention sort of the industries that will have an impact per se. But any insight you want to add to that same sentiment?
Yeah, I think we have to be concerned. Like he has said, if we think about, I started off as an accountant. I trained as an accountant, then I later on realized that machines are being built, and we started using accounting software. You couldn't be moving around with the, large ledgers, analysis books. That just came out of fashion. So I had to learn how to use new software packages that were being developed so that I could work and function in my job and, move to the next level and so on and so forth. So if we think about certain kinds of sectors in the industry, for some, it's going to be easy to quickly retrain the people for new roles that they can play. But I think for other kinds of applications, it will be very difficult. So we need to be having a conversation. And I think partly there's been a lag in terms of, policy development when we think about these things. There's been a lag in terms of institutions of higher education thinking about if this is the future that is being, imagined, how can we imagine or reimagine how to train people that have to work in this new context? I doubt there's any school right now of public policy or public administration that specifically focuses and looks in its curricula on issues around AI. And yet we're having this conversation, and this is really, really important. So I think it's a whole lot of things we need to be concerned. And in being concerned, it's not being frightened and feeling like we can't do anything about it. I think there's a lot that we can do. If we have examples of human beings that can be retrained or that can repurpose their skills elsewhere, then that's what we should be working on. So it's exciting times, but then it's also times of concern. Certain industries are going to, human beings from certain industries are going to be wiped out because, robots have to take over. But, we need to find a better way to use that productive capacity so that it's not just dormant.
Do you particularly have any examples of where humans and robotics like that outside of manufacturing and design, right? Like, where do you see a service where there's a need for a human and an AI sort of robotic exchange that can maybe be an opportunity to start teaching now, maybe an introduction to how to work with communities that are not necessarily developing the actual AI itself?
I think Dr. White talked about the health sector. I think that's a good space, the mining industry too. So I know in my country, I'm from Zambia, and we have large mines at home. Most of the operations have now been automated, and it is for the safety of human beings in a way that certain things have to be done, alongside machines. So we just need to start changing our mindset when we think about, what role can machines play, and we need to be imagining all the time, are there operations where human beings and machines can work together? What are the benefits? If we see that the benefits of getting a machine to work alongside a human being are higher, then we should be doing more of that. But if we see that certain kind of operations can purely be done by human being, then let's do a lot more of that. And let's leave to machines what machines can do best, because of course they are more efficient than human beings. They can process data, they can carry out large functionalities. So I think it's getting to a space of accepting, and this is going to go on. And so how can we live with this? How can we adapt ourselves, and how can we ensure that in the process of doing that, we do not harm anybody and we do not leave anyone behind? Because right now, because of the lack of policy advancements in this space, the lack of preparedness in this space in terms of human and workforce capacity, we're leaving out a lot of people.
Absolutely. I think another great question that we were thinking about is like, how are machines looking at us as humans? Are they going to look at us as like, the peasants or, slow, sick, or obsolete? I mean, what is your conversation around that? Your insight on that?
Okay, so I like that. And I think it takes me back to the 3 laws of robots that I talked about. And those laws, let me go back, have to be fed into the machine by the human being. So the problem that we really have here, which I see as a big issue, is if you have a human being who's feeding machines wrong things, then we are all done. So I'll end there, Dr. White.
Yeah, it's important because if we program the machine for efficiency, And we say to the machine, particularly in the HR role, in looking at human talent, we want someone who's very efficient. That machine is going to go through resumes and look at people who have a certain criteria. It won't deviate from that certain criteria. And if you happen not to be able to speak Spanish, but you can speak Italian, if the programmer didn't say, we want you to consider someone who speaks Italian, you're going to be kicked out. And so it can be a very, I guess, excruciating process in terms of people being excluded for minute kinds of things. It may look at us as being, well, we're not as efficient as machines. And if we use the criteria of efficiency based on a machine, what a machine can do, we're going to lose every time. But what machines cannot do, and I think this is what we need to be aware of, they cannot be as creative as human beings can be, and not, at least not at the moment. We have a program that, and so I think we need to make sure that the programming of machines and artificial intelligence allow for the consideration of creativity that human beings bring to bear, because machines look at monotonous kinds of things that happen over and over again.
Yeah, that was my next question, thinking about, right, the creative part of what human experience is. And also even considering the accountability as a human decision maker, right? Where's the accountability for these machines and any sort of AI intelligence? Like, has that been a conversation, and what your thought is behind that?
That has not been a conversation, but it's a very crucial question. Let's say an autonomously driven automobile runs a stoplight. Who's accountable? There's no driver. Is it well, you've got an insurance company, I guess. Maybe they have to be the ones. But so, or if an autonomous or machine or artificial intelligence turns off a ventilator for a patient by mistake, who's going to be accountable? So I think that's a very crucial question that we've not addressed in terms of, we hold human beings accountable. We can fire them, we can sue them. You can't do that for machines. And so once they are programming and behaving as human beings, then do we need to make sure we treat them and hold them accountable like human beings? That discussion has not been had, but it certainly, I think, is one that needs to be had, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, and if they break down at the most crucial time, who do we hold accountable? Is it the person that has programmed it, or, I really like just tying this into the example of Ida, the artist robot that was, speaking before the House of Lords in the UK early in October. The machine broke down, and thankfully, the one that created it was there to fix it. Now, if the person that created it wasn't there to fix it, then what happens? Are humans? So it basically, what I'm trying to say here is that, we cannot do away with human beings. We have to do with human beings throughout these processes. And if machines do things that they're not supposed to do, if they malfunction, there has to be a human being that has to fix them. So in that sense, it gives a lot of hope and excitement, It's not like we're completely eliminating certain kind of human functions, but the issues around who has to be accountable when a machine malfunctions, or who has to take responsibility for things that are not done right, that's a conversation that needs to be had. And I think that feeds into issues around policy and yeah. Thank you.
I didn't discuss it, but I was in one of the slides. There are two areas, and I think you did, Dr. Mazzotta, mention this as well. In criminal justice and in insurance, right now we're seeing things that are happening that are causing disparities in terms of policy outcomes. For example, artificial intelligence is designed to see where the most accidents are in a community, and insurance rates are set based upon level of incidents in that community. And one of the things they found out, and just looking a little deep into the data, is that the people who often live in urban areas are not the ones creating the accidents. But if you simply stop at saying geographically where the accidents occur, that's where we're going to have the higher insurance rates. Then the people in that inner city are going to be charged higher accident rates, as opposed to the drivers from the suburbs. We have the same problem in the criminal justice system. Many of the hearings and the data that's analyzed for sentencing, that's done by artificial intelligence today. And if the biases that are in society go into those sentencing, that means that there's going to be a disparities in terms of minorities and underserved communities. So who is going to be held accountable for making those kinds of decisions in terms of the programming once we learn? Right now, we have a situation where we find DNA is coming up telling us that, hey, some people have been sentenced for crimes they didn't commit. We hold the state accountable. Who do you hold accountable in IA? Is it the state? And most of these are contract. It's not the state, but the state has contracted with the private vendor to do these kinds of things. So we have to, I think, ask them very tough questions in terms of outcomes and impact and who we hold people accountable, or who we hold accountable. The state that does the contracting or the actual contractor, him or herself.
Those are great questions, obviously tied around systematic, injustices and things like that we're still battling now.
Exactly.
In the economy. And I'm just thinking of the politics as well, right? Like, how does AI technology impact the distribution of wealth? Is that a great question I pose, I guess, to you, Dr. Musada? What are your thoughts behind that?
You're on mute.
How technology impacts the distribution of wealth. So I've tried to walk on the path of balance. I'm excited about this, but then I'm not excited about this. When you ask me about how this impacts the distribution of wealth, it makes me go like, so I go back on sort of, feeling a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. In terms of distribution of wealth, and we look at the different kinds of industries where some of these technologies are going to be deployed and are being deployed. Those are industries and sectors of the economy where traditionally we've had people of color having a higher representation of people working in those workforce spaces. So if we see that there's a lot of use of technology in manufacturing, in construction, it means that the trickle-down effect of whatever value is going to be created there, and if we think of wages from labor, that's lost, right? So it means that the distribution of wealth also gets impacted. And in this case, it gets impacted negatively on those groups of people. So I think as we have this conversation, we have to keep at the back of our minds, if construction is going to be heavily reliant on machinery, on technology, who are we taking out? If farming is going to be fully automated, which I come from Zambia, in Africa, we do lots of farming. If farming is going to be highly mechanized and automated, who is being taken out? And if they're taken out, what alternatives do we have for them? I think it's the issue of alternatives. If we take out these people in these sectors, what else are we giving them? Are we leaving them to be helpless because we haven't thought about what else we can utilize their labor for? So all those are things that we need to think about. So in short, negatively impacts our wealth distribution, especially for those that are already vulnerable.
Dr. White, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, she's been pretty thorough, but just in terms of the marketplace and organizations, the greatest component of most organizations in terms of costs is personnel or labor costs. And if you eliminate that, that means that the profit ratio is going to be higher. And I think we need to have some policies in terms of when you eliminate jobs and therefore you're going to make a greater profit, you ought to have a social responsibility to at least invest some of that back in those workers that you're eliminating so they can be retrained. I went to the Home Depot, automated, my checkout. 3 years ago, they had 8 clerks there. Now they have 1. Now, what happened to those other clerks? The jobs are families. So yes, it's going to have a major impact in 2 ways. One, those people who are most vulnerable are going to have less money, and the people who are employing the IA is going to have more money because they're cutting out on the cost. So profits will go up.
Yeah, and the time span for that happening, I was trying to think back of when I first saw a Home Depot incident. That for me, it's Target, right? I and I go to Target and I see the automation behind that. Seemed like it was like a 10 to maybe 15-year span when that happened. But because of technology advancing so fast, is that something you're like looking at 2 years, right? Because you're introducing
Exactly.
technology at light speed almost.
Exactly. You're absolutely correct. We're talking about for the next 5 years, things happen phenomenally. I used to tell my students, I remember we had manual typewriter and then electric typewriter. And then a typewriter could hold a paragraph, a page, and then 5 pages, 10 pages. And then we had a computer. In my lifetime, I say to them that given this, what I've seen in my lifetime, I can't even imagine how advanced it's going to be. I used to see when I was young in a comic book, a Dick Tracy watch where you could talk in. That's reality. Star Trek, many of the things in those movies. So I only share that to say that, yes, you're absolutely correct. The speed of technology and its impact on us. And we need to understand that it's impacting our lives. It's changing us, our behaviors, our social behaviors, our learning behaviors. So our work behavior, and yes, and it's going to happen at lightning speed.
And in your presentation, you mentioned the sex doll because of the actual realistic side of what AI is bringing to us. And also the ethics side of that, right? I know we don't kind of err on the side of religion and ethics and things like that, but how is that, have you seen, or if this is just popping up, I mean, is ethics out the window when it comes to AI?
Well, I generally have a larger discussion about that sex doll. And one of the discussions we have, you can program that sex doll to say, hit me again, sweetheart. Now, psychologically, should we allow somebody to be able to do that? It's her property or whomever. But it's also perpetuating a behavior that we say is illegal. So I think there are all kinds of ethical things about using those instruments for your fetish behavior that then could be harmful to the rest of society. So I think there ought to be some things that you cannot do even to a robot that looks like a human, because I think it has implications for your behavior towards other human beings.
Dr. Mosada, anything to add before I open up to our group of participants for some questions, if we may?
Yeah, I think just a little on, how AI changes us, but then also how it changes our interactions with other people, and what we see a lot, and also what we believe. If because of some algorithm controlled somewhere, I switch on my phone, I'm only seeing certain kind of content, my mind starts digesting that a lot, and it starts changing and altering me. I think we've seen a lot around the world in terms of how, some of these algorithms have pushed certain things to come to the forefront, in terms of, wars elsewhere, and just creating spaces where there's no stability. It should excite us, but it should concern all of us. So whether we like it or not, we're being changed, and we've been changed a lot, yeah, let me end here.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to open it up to, if you can put your questions in the chat, that we can contribute to the conversation to provide some insight for anyone who's interested in asking a question. Feel free to do so in the chat. We have plenty of time to ask, and it's so intriguing. I think people just have been sharing comments. I know, going back and remembering the typewriter and things like that nature, or someone mentioning that in Houston, the community protested having an AI sex shop there.
Yes, it was going to be the first of its kind in the United States. This was back in 2018. and they showed that the business owner had falsely represented the nature of the business. Different permits had not been requested, different pieces. That's what they were using to halt it. This was back in 2018. It was actually going to be in the Houston Galleria area as well. So many people had concerns. Galleria was their Houston's flagship mall. Of course, it's not the level of our North Park and our Highland Village, but that was supposed to be their flagship mall, and having it in that area. So people halted it. So that was going to be the first of its kind in the United States. And so when you mentioned that, it definitely brought to mind. I remember when we lived there, just many people were horrified by the idea of having such a shop in Houston, which is also the #1 place in the nation for sex trafficking. So
Yeah.
many ethical implications. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I have a question here from Suwasna Lewis. How do you think AI will impact K through 12 teachers and educators in the future? It's a great question.
Well, if we're talking about teaching math, a machine probably could be programmed to do that. It may, in fact, fill a void. We have a shortage of teachers and nurses in this country, and it may fill a void. Now, while I think we should use the technology, I'm a person who's been teaching online, and it took me a long time to accept that that's a valid mechanism for teaching, because I was concerned about the social dynamics in person versus online. Young people seem to have adjusted to that. But I do think when we're talking about young children, they need in person a human being to interact with. That's just kind of my personal biases, because I think the machine, while it can give you all the math and respond to all the questions, perhaps even better than a human being, it can't give you that individualized attention that perhaps the machine cannot realize you need.
Yeah, I think it can also impact the K through 12 system in a positive way. When we think about if certain functions are being utilized, if certain functions are being outsourced or taken on by these applications instead of the people. Most of the times we know and we read that people that work in the K through 12 system are bent out. They spend a lot of time preparing for classes, and they spend their resources, and it's basically the time. Some people work more than 40 hours, more than 50 hours a week, so that they can just ensure that they deliver a good quality of education to the students. So if some of the time is saved, they could better use it on, the social aspects that Dr. White has talked about. Can we spend more time with certain kinds of students and give them the right kind of support that they need for them to be able to succeed? So if that's what it can be used on to redeploy time to other aspects of learning that would make students better off, I think that would really be good.
That's great. I mean, I don't know if you tapped in a little bit to Dr. White, mental health, like the conversations that need to be had. And I guess AI can do that too. I'm sure. Now that I'm thinking, I'm sure, but there's a lot of that sensory sort of thing. It's just so many conversations around that as well.
Sure.
Do I have any other questions from our participants that are here with us that you'd like to ask?
While they're thinking, I could share with you I made this presentation on a couple of occasions, and people in the psychology area asked me, will robots and IA be able to really be sensitive at some point in the future to humans' feelings and emotions? And my response at the time was no. And my argument was, unless we can make, as long as robots and IA is mechanical, they can't be sensitive. That was my argument. Since I made that statement several years ago, IA has now programmed systems they can pick up different behaviors as to whether you're angry, when you're upset. So my original statement, no, I have to say we have to look at that, because I think we are programming artificial intelligence now to respond to eye contact, mouth movement, stress levels, and making determinants about whether you're upset or whether you're angry or not. That they are machines that can do that. I still don't think, though, they can do the job that a human being can do, but they are making progress in that area.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Another question here. Is there a colonial aspect to AI? Thus, what leverage will continents and countries already, guess left behind to compete, right? So we know the disparities there. You want to add, I think you did talk a little bit about that, the leverage. I think Dr. White, you showed a paragraph of the countries that are leading that, and the disparities are similar to the disparities we have now, even before AI has been introduced to us. Do you have a little more to add to that on competing with other countries?
I think Dr. Mazzata probably has a better handle on that. And if she wants to lead, I'll let her go, and then I'll share a funny story that I want to share about colonizing AI.
Okay, yeah. So most of the times when I have this conversation, I usually start from, the different stages of the Industrial Revolution. So we have the first stage, we have the second, the third, and the fourth, where we're dealing with AI, robotics, and big data. And most of the times I say that a number of countries in the developing world, they could easily fall in still the first Industrial Revolution. And some are really struggling to even have, certain applications and certain functionalities that were there in the second Industrial Revolution, and even in the third. So what we are talking about now is we're saying, Dr. James's question, can we leapfrog countries from the first to the fourth Industrial Revolution? That's very hard. So those that are left in these different stages, in some places we had, the steam engine, the age of the steam engine and all. In some places, there's still no access to electricity. It's really hard to get the entire population have access to electricity. So they're still stuck. So how can we leapfrog them to the fourth Industrial Revolution? That's just unthinkable. And how are we impacting them? How are they being impacted by all these different developments? Because it's worlds apart, right? So in terms of the inequality existing in that space, that's a conversation that needs to be had. You cannot be talking about utilizing fourth Industrial Revolution, applications when you're still stuck in the first and second. You can barely even have access to energy. You cannot give your entire population access to electricity, and that's something that should have been sorted out as a basic thing. So I think the inequality is going to exist, and I like the framing of it in terms of, colonization and all. I think this is a conversation that needs to be had to just do a deeper reflection and to see if, where we're coming from continues to perpetuate inequality into this new phase that we are in. So in short, I think those countries that are, have been left out historically, they cannot compete at the level where they're supposed to be competing. They're not going to be competitive because that's how the system works now. So we have to find ways to ensure that we dismantle these things that make the system to work the way it works, so that we can ensure that more opportunities are provided and there's more players in the space. One of the slides that Dr. White showed, he showed on use of robots across the world by continent. I think I saw for the Africa region, there was only 2 that I saw there. There is lots of applications in the mining sector of AI and all, but if we just look at, we've been talking about climate change, and right now there's the COP summit taking place in Egypt, and if we're having these conversations and we're saying most of these applications that we're even using for AI are actually, made possible because of the use of certain kinds of minerals. Where are those minerals coming from? most of those minerals are coming from African countries. But does Africa have the ability to even afford any of these things that are being developed as a result of the use of those minerals? I doubt that. How many countries in Africa, for example, have self-driven vehicles?
Mhm.
Can we talk about putting up, electric charging stations for cars? When we can't even afford to buy those cars, yet the minerals are mined from the continent. So this is a conversation of gross injustice. So should I go on?
Like that's our next session starting there, right? We're going to be moving simultaneously, advancing technology and then advancing a poverty-stricken country that has no access to even water at some point. The conversation can definitely take us into depth. And I appreciate this has been eye-opening for me. And I'm hoping that a lot of our participants were able to have a great, insight on where this conversation is going. We're coming to an end. I want to offer some closing remarks from both of our presenters, Dr. Wyatt and Dr. Musada. If you want to kind of give some ending remarks and we'll wrap this up. I know we have another session next week, which will continue on with the conversation, but I'll start with Dr. Musada. Any closing remarks you'd like to give for today's session?
Yeah, I think we just laid the ground today, and there's still a lot of things that we need to look at in the next conversation. We'll talk a lot about equality and how these systems, need to get all of us to be thinking. And we'll also talk about, I think, legal frameworks around and what is being done. So I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to start on this conversation today. And I hope that in the next few days that we're going to have, if the people that have any questions or they have something that they would like us to specifically address, they could forward it to Dr. James and to yourself, Veronica, and we can pick on from there. But I think this was a good start for today. So I look forward to next week's conversation. Dr. White?
I echo those remarks as well. It's been invigorating. I'll share with you, and I hope that happens here. I made a presentation on IA probably 3 years ago in Ethiopia, and I learned, and I can't take the credit for this. I learned about 2 weeks ago, they now are offering a PhD in artificial intelligence and hosted the Global Conference on Artificial Intelligence. So I want us to become not just fearful, but let this be an intriguing opportunity for us to have an impact on our communities and get involved in this discussion. As I think, as Dr. Mazzotta pointed out, it's going to impact our lives whether we want it to or not. And we need to be involved in it at every level, from the data generation, design of the robots and the machines, the servicing. We need to get involved in that, and we need to do it now. Next week, we're going to talk about, it may be discouraging, but we're going to talk about the disproportionate impact that it's having on two communities in particular, Hispanics and African Americans, particularly in the US. And so, yeah, we wanted to lay the foundation today, but also next week, we're going to point out just how urgent it is for us to be concerned about this field called artificial intelligence. So thank you for allowing us to be here today. And we're excited and looking forward to seeing you again next week.
Well, thank you all. And hopefully this is a great start to the rest of your days. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you guys at our next conversation next week.